So it's been 6 months since George Floyd and since you wrote that very powerful letter to your baby son, Zion. Fabulous name, by the way, for your son. And I just wonder if you think that during that 6 months, we've made any progress.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, appreciate you inviting me on to discuss the letter. And I think some context to that is George Floyd was killed on the 25th of May. My son's due date was the 26th of May. So I had in the diary that he was to be born on the 26th. He was actually born on the 8th of June. But in that period, I disconnected. I'm someone who's very back-to-back in meetings, and I disconnected to focus on welcoming my firstborn son into the world. I was in a great space to do so. And then the news of George Floyd came literally to me in that period. And I remember just being in a very negative space because, the world isn't conducive for the child. And I'm, welcoming a black boy at that. And so I didn't release the letter actually at that time. It took me from May to September to fully write how I felt and what I wanted to communicate to my son. And I decided to release it on my birthday, October the 9th, as a public statement. And, in the letter, and you've read it, it's a mix of a lot of things, from how I felt to my hopes for the future, to a vision of what the world could be, and where we are now. And to answer your question of, do I feel it's changed? And I'll try and do this very quickly. But for me, it was big to see so many leaders, so many people that weren't black. There's a lot of CEOs. Most CEOs in the UK of the biggest organizations in their sector are white. So it's very interesting to see white men specifically come out and speak very candidly, honestly, for what would feel like the first time in a very long time about how they felt and what they were interested in doing. But, I feel like in a time where George Floyd and the message that came with that moment took us one stride into the future, a lot of our responses, in my opinion, have been very programmatic and very detached from the reality of what we're talking about. And so you'd see organizations with very corporate responses, or we're going to put this task force together, or we're going to have, these 10 points that we're going to achieve. And it felt like almost overnight, and how I describe it in letter to Zion is it felt very reactive as opposed to reflective. And this idea that we're going to solve all things systemic racism in a period of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And I guess out of Letter to Zion was the Black British Network. And that was my commitment to Zion. And with the Black British Network, the idea is, how can we have a forum that speaks to both people in positions of power, or what I call enlightened soft power, and position that next to all things Black Renaissance, and really bring the conversation together and start to reflect. And this is going to take time for us to really start to unpick and unpack all things systemic racism. And it's going to take a lot of listening. And I do feel like it was very hot flash. It was very now. And I say the media put a microphone in the face of almost every Black person in the UK, which was great to see. And then they chucked the microphone to the back of the newsroom. And it's kind of like, well, what's next? And, where it feels like we're at the tail end of all things George Floyd. And out of that moment, my concern was, where's the vehicle that would be a custodian for that trajectory? Where's the company that sits next to all these companies that are making all these commitments and holds them to account? And it's almost like everyone's gone back into their silos, and organizations and corporates specifically, it feels, have prioritized we need to find the best Black talent, as opposed to we need to build the best framework for talent to thrive, period. And how you go about building the best framework is through dialogue, through conversation, through iteration. And we're not going to get it right straight away, but it needs to be done external from any one organization within corporate, or any one kind of club of people that do not have a lived experience of what it means and what it feels like to be Black, and needs to be done in partnership. And so that's what some of what I'm doing. And that's part of what inspired me doing Letter to Zion and me kind of giving birth to the Black British Network. But happy to kind of discuss and explore a bit more.
It's really interesting what you say there about the disconnect from the reality of it, because my experience was I grew up in a mixed race family. So I have always been aware of racism. I have witnessed a lot of racism in my life. But a lot of my white friends, George Floyd happened, and it was like they suddenly realised this was a problem. They thought that it had to do just with George Floyd. They didn't understand that that was a lightning rod that spoke to black people throughout the globe and reflected their experiences. And they thought it was just a problem in America. And so those are the things that I've been trying to tackle since then, to help people understand that this is a global issue. And I'm interested in your experiences as a British black man. Can you give us a glimpse into your personal experience of racism?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking, and I think this is a good platform also to kind of start to unpick and unpack some of that. I was born in New Cross and I've lived in a lot of different places. Do you know what I mean? I've lived in some predominantly white areas and I've lived in some predominantly black areas, but always kind of been in and around kind of New Cross, South East London, and that's home for me. And it's interesting to see how all these different places navigate. And yes, I've experienced different forms of racism in all these different areas. And I think something I'll touch on today would have been when I walked away from my master's degree in architecture, and also studying architecture. I was one of very few black people in the course, and it actually was encouraged not to do architecture by my teacher before I went and studied it. And still went and studied it, but I walked away from my master's because I was looking at how they were gentrifying the community, and they were knocking down these buildings, and they weren't really doing anything immediately to support the community. And I felt like if I just graduated, became an architect, I'd be drawing lines. So I said, what can I do right now? And I walked away and I started building these studios. Well, I built the first studio in Peckham, and the mission was to bridge the gap between the community and the creative sector initially, and almost operate as a WeWork of the creative industries. And we were doing some really interesting stuff. And so at top level, and I'll give you this context before I give you the story, we were in front of a £70 million regeneration match fund to redevelop more spaces in the community. I directly engaged Richard Rogers, who's a really prominent architect, to be part of the conversation. We had confirmed a company called BDP as our development partner to build more of the studios. We were talking to one building that was 22,000 square feet, stretched across 2 floors. The owners had offered us, or we'd negotiated a £1 million capital contribution towards the space for us to redevelop it. And we were talking to the worlds of music, media, film, fashion, enterprise and gaming, you name it. And we're talking to the leaders of these industries. How on a commercial lens do we bring the facilities to the community, and how on a social lens do we kind of widen participation and access? And this was more around social mobility than just race or being black. And I remember we had a really tough time with the then landlord that didn't want to see us in the building for a reason I couldn't explain, who called the police, right? He kept on changing locks and making up all these things. And, you can imagine all the things I've just said to you on the table, but we can't operate effectively. We can't trade effectively because this guy keeps changing the locks. And he called the police one day, and the police come to the studio, and there's a bag of us. We let them in, and they go, when I've asked them why they're here, and they've gone on our scanner, it says 2 black boys have broken into a block of flats. And you're looking at this policeman, and I asked the guy, would this look a block of flats to you? It's like, well, no, it doesn't. And so at that point, it's like, your blackness and being a black man is weaponized on you in a sense, because if you tell the police 2 black boys have broken into a block of flats, if they come near, it turns in, I could have left that day in handcuffs or worse. And then to make matters worse, when we went to the council to talk to them about the issues we were facing, it was a white man, for context, in the council who turned around and said to me, after everything we said, after all the telling them everything we're doing with, your BDP, your Richard Rogers, all the funds we're in front of, he turns around and says to me, when it comes to black issues in the community, you don't talk directly to me. You talk to this one other black guy who's not even in the council. And this was 2018. And that was the moment, and I say this often when I speak, because I do a lot of public speaking in organizations and the rest. And I say that's when I came to what I call the second realization. And it's a lot of black people, I've not heard someone quite like this before, who come to that second realization when you realize you're black for the second time in your life, and it's as a result of some type of injustice or discrimination. And I left that day and I went and slept in my studio on a block bed at risk of an unlawful eviction. And that was the birth of 56 black men. And, you know, to answer your question of what the experience has been like for me, there's one experience where I'm doing everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going above and beyond. Even race aside, what I was doing and trying to develop in the community was huge. We're talking to L&Q Group, who's London and Quadrant, one of the biggest housing associations, about how when they're developing, what can we do programmatically with the spaces? But I'm not able to flesh out these conversations accordingly, because I'm out here battling a crooked landlord who's just trying to strip me for whatever change he can find, on top of changing the locks every other day because he feels like it.
Cephas, I could talk to you all day, and I will definitely have you back on the show. Unfortunately, you've made me very late for the news, but thank you so much for your time this evening and for sharing some of your experiences with us.